Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a very special list for you, and it's not special because it's a list of movies that will leave you in awe, although they may do that, but believe me when I say it's for all the wrong reasons. Be it the shoddy special effects that will leave you scratching your head, or the awful CGI monsters that look absolutely laughable, for this list, we've picked a series of underwater creature features that nobody dares to recommend. The emotional core, of course, remains pretty much the same. Humans get stranded, they come across a terrifying monster from the depths, but the end result couldn't be more different. Now, we'll probably never know why these movies were even created in the first place. Was it an attempt to recreate the success of films like Alien and The Thing, or was there something else behind their creation? Were they just trying to make a cheap buck, or did they really have an artistic vision? Whatever the case, one thing is certain, if B-movies are your thing, you're definitely going to have a good time with these 10 underwater horror films. With that out of the way, let's get right into the video. Plankton, 1994. Kicking off our list is a 1994 Italian horror movie named Plankton, also known as Creatures from the Abyss. Directed by Alvaro Passeri, the film has earned a reputation as a wild 90s giallo about 5 stranded teenagers who get lost at sea in a dinghy and suddenly come upon an empty yacht containing a monstrous toxic mutant fish that starts infecting and killing them one by one. And what's particularly interesting here is how absurd the film turns out to be. Filled with laughable dialogue and plenty of campy gore, the flick is a wild example of the kind of so bad it's good movie that you just have to see to believe. And coming from a country like Italy, which has given us many iconic films, Creatures of the Abyss, aka Plankton, stands out for one major reason. A horny fish monster that's just terrific in an entirely otherworldly fashion. Of course, before saying anything about this fish film, which is gonna hook you, it's important to mention that it's certainly not a family-friendly pick, for it contains a lot of sex scenes. But one thing is for sure, several reviews have hailed Plankton as the best underwater horror since Jaws, and that alone should tell you just how wild this movie is. Second, the film has plenty in common with the Evil Dead franchise, except for one major difference. This one has a flying killer fish, plus a very strange boat. In a nutshell, the movie is super wacky, but also kinda sick, and you'll barely be able to compose your thoughts after watching it. It's cheap, it's gory, it's trashy, and it's also inexplicably an absolute sleazefest, and we kinda love it for that. Add to that some pretty good Rick Baker-esque special effects, and voila, you've got Plankton, the 1994 Italian sea horror film nobody dares to recommend. Sector 7, 2011. Up next, we've got Sector 11, a South Korean sea horror film, because honestly, what could be better than a South Korean horror/thriller film? Well, a 3D South Korean horror/thriller film. Directed by Kim Ji-hoon, famous for The Tower, the film centers on an oil field named Sector 7, located in a sea near the famous Jeju Island. Ha Ji-won plays a marine equipment manager on said oil field named Hae-jun, who's leading a team of oil rig workers in the field. The turning point in the tale arrives when they're all forced by circumstances to battle a horrifying CGI sea monster. The Korean sci-fi action thriller focuses on the dangers of working on an isolated offshore oil rig, but at the same time, it's not all about action and action only. Having clearly been made to compete with Western blockbusters, of course, back at that time, the Korean film industry wasn't as progressive in nature as it is today, the film received mixed reactions from viewers who either appreciated or ridiculed the Korean actors facing off against a CGI underwater oil rig monster. Even then, we can barely deny that some action scenes from the film are really fun to watch, and watching the cannibalistic CGI sea monster chow down on the humans is undoubtedly fun. Something really close to how we feel while watching those boring shark attack films. So if you're a fan of Korean horror films and you want to look at how the film industry used to be way before it gained mass recognition and started giving us really amazing films, you can, of course, take a look at this one. And I bet you won't be disappointed, or at least not really disappointed. Dagon, 2001. Up next is a Spanish horror fantasy film that definitely deserves a spot on this list, And yet, daggone is another movie that barely gets the attention it deserves. But why is that? Ezra Godin plays Paul Marsh, who's yachting along with his friends, but unfortunately, a freak storm arrives causing wreckage on their boat while also stranding them in an isolated place. When Paul decides to seek help from a nearby village, he observes that the residents are behaving really strangely, and what's worse, two of his friends are already trapped in the wreckage of their boat. What convinces Ezra that he's stuck in this hellish place is when he comes upon a mermaid whom he often sees in his nightmares. And of course, this movie also has a sea monster. Some of the scenes with that monster, as well as the strangely behaving locals, are really horrifying, and some actually turn out to be really fun. So if you're a fan of cheesy horror B-films, and especially Spanish horror B-films, then don't forget to add this one to your watch list.
Get some.
The Rift, 1990. Our next entry is also a Spanish horror film. However, unlike the previous one that had some mythical aspects, this one's more sci-fi, and it's called The Rift. Also known as La Grieta, The Rift centers on the crew of an experimental submarine called the Siren II. They're all set on a mission to look into the sudden disappearance of another submarine. However, little do they know that deep in the trenches, a few alien monsters are awaiting their fate. Meet Wick Hayes, the protagonist, played by Jack Scalia. He's the one leading the crew into the bottomless depths of the ocean since he was the one who was blamed for everything that happened with the other submarine. So, the entire film revolves around how Wick ensures the well-being of both himself and his companions as he battles the mutant sea creatures awaiting their prey. The twist in the tale is, of course, a series of illegal genetic experiments that have given rise to these weird alien underwater monsters. This is also why the film was retitled Endless Descent in the US, as we witness the inevitable fate of the engineers deep beneath the ocean. However, this movie also opened to mixed reactions from viewers. Let's not forget that the film boasts only 4.7 out of 10 stars on IMDb, but we can't even deny that the film actually delivers on its promise to fans of both B-movies and creature features. If you're a fan of bad horror films, this one definitely needs a spot on your list.
You shouldn't have done that. You've woken them up.
Proteus, 1995. Our next film is none other than Proteus, a 1995 British sci-fi body horror film starring Craig Fairbanks, Doug Bradley, and Tony Berry. And this time, the story concerns a group of heroin smugglers. The party of drug smugglers suddenly find themselves stranded on an abandoned oil rig, so they decide to seek refuge there. And as they look about for ways to survive and make their way back home, they come across this deadly, shape-shifting underwater monster who starts picking its human prey off one by one. At the same time, the oil rig also happens to conceal an illegal genetic research laboratory, kind of similar to the Rift's outcome. The source material for this underwater creature feature is the 1983 sci-fi novel Slimer, written by Josh Brosnan and Leroy Kettle under the shared pseudonym Harry Adam Knight. The sea monster happens to be created from mutated shark DNA, which absorbs its victims and then happens to mimic their forms. The secret corporate immortality experiment goes absolutely wrong, and then there's a sad twist in the tale of these shipwrecked heroin smugglers, which culminates in this desperate fight for survival against a horrifying and unconventional sea monster. This 1995 cult classic still gets a surprising amount of discussion about whether it was actually trash or actually a treasure beneath all the mess. And what's even weirder is that the acting of all the drug smugglers is not as terrible as you might expect from a film with such disappointing reviews. Oh, did I forget to mention that Proteus has really low scores from both critics and audiences? Even funnier, Doug Bradley makes a special appearance and his screen time lasts about 10 minutes. That's right, Pinhead himself is used just briefly in the film so they could put his name on the IMDb page. And the shoddy quality of the special effects in this movie are worth a mention because they were done by Bob Keane, who created special effects for films like Alien and Return of the Jedi. Yeah, this one's a fascinating mess. Leviathan, 1989. Our next entry on this list is one of the most campy picks we have for you today. The famous 1989 sci-fi horror film Leviathan was directed by George P. Cosmatos, and it stars Meg Foster as the head of a major corporation named Martin. Martin hires a crew, including a geologist played by Peter Weller, and that crew decides to descend deeper into the trenches of the ocean for a mining project when they suddenly come upon a wrecked ship which which they decide to investigate. That's where our titular character is introduced, the Leviathan, who kills some crew members and causes them to mutate, and all of this results in a desperate battle for survival. Of course, watching it is a lot more laughable than describing it, and on top of that, the CGI monster looks even more ridiculous. Critics have some really amazing views on this one, by the way. I saw someone say that if you wanted films like Alien and The Thing to be slower paced, then this film could actually work, and I kind of agree with that. What's funny though is that unlike the other films on this list, people actually happen to like Leviathan, maybe because it reminds them of horror movies that are actually good, or maybe for some other reason entirely. Either way, this film has become cinematic comfort food for many horror fans. Island of the Fishmen, 1979. Up next, we have the Italian action horror film Island of the Fishmen. Yep, Fishmen, not fishermen. Also known as Island of Mutations, the movie is of course known in Italy for its laughably bad sea monsters that hunt down the characters. If you want to get a feel for what this film is like, you could look it up on Wikipedia and check out the poster, because that alone will probably already get you laughing. However, in 1980, about 30 minutes of the original footage was actually removed, and then it was released in international markets under the title Something Waits in the Dark. Later, the film again underwent revisions and was released in 1981 under the title Screamers. The film focuses on a group of prisoners and a doctor whose prison ship suddenly gets wrecked in the Caribbean. A strange couple invites them to stay in their house, and the prisoners begin to mysteriously disappear, causing the doctor to investigate and find out that the pair is discreetly associated with a sea monster. It's a pretty messy movie, but at the same time, whatever Sergio Martino throws at viewers is just indescribably entertaining. I mean, this movie has it all. Voodoo dolls, a mad scientist doing nasty scientific experiments, the lost city of Atlantis, and even Barbara Bach taking relaxing showers. So yeah, don't forget to add this one to your watch list. It's the exact kind of stupid fun that this list is thriving on. Cold Skin, 2017. Our next entry is Xavier Gen's 2017 sci-fi horror film based on the 2002 novel of the same name by Albert Sanchez Pinol. Of course, Ray Stevenson and David Oakes deliver solid performances in the film, and add to that a striking Lovecraftian setting that enhances the overall atmosphere of this creature feature, the beautiful and eerie island displays that are pure eye candy, the iconic creature fights, deep questions about human nature and war, and more. However, the film has its fair share of drawbacks as well. The story moves at a pretty fast clip, and some scenes can feel pretty repetitive. Nevertheless, unlike other films on this list, people actually recommend this movie to viewers. You can find people saying stuff like, "Oh, this is a solid Lovecraftian action horror flick, and I enjoyed watching it." Someone even said on Reddit that it's the 2019 film The Lighthouse meets Deep Ones, and I have to agree with that. The atmosphere is brooding and terrific, and the storyline is actually pretty interesting. So yeah, this one deserves a spot on your watch list as well. Just be aware of the fact that it's a B movie going in. Sea Fever, 2019. Okay, for our second last entry, we have the 2019 sci-fi horror film Sea Fever, and what's particularly interesting about this movie is that while critics loved it, with an 87% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, the general audience didn't feel the same way. The story follows marine biology student Siobhan. She and her crew struggle for survival when they develop an infection thanks to a mysterious underwater monster. One Letterboxd review compared the film to an X-Files episode before Scully and Mulder show up as the detectives, and that might be the most accurate way to describe it. But at the same time, plenty of viewers enjoyed this film basically because it's a single-location horror movie. The characters are drawn in broad strokes, but the film remains highly enjoyable and taut thanks to the sense of claustrophobia that persists throughout. All in all, if claustrophobic horror films are your cup of tea, you'll definitely love this one. Grabbers, 2012. Finally, we have Grabbers, the Irish monster horror comedy, and the final entry on our list. Now, this one is a comedy film after all, so any campy or ridiculous moments you see are completely intentional. Directed by John Wright, a well-known Northern Irish name in horror cinema, The film stars an ensemble of talented actors who come face to face with blood-sucking monsters and are forced to battle these creatures as they attack their homeland, Aaron Island. And there's only one way to survive these monsters: by getting drunk. Yeah, this film kinda feels like a fever dream. The funniest part is that the murders are investigated by two mismatched cops. One's an alcoholic and the other is his new by-the-book partner, and when they discover that the only solution is a bottle of booze, the aftermath becomes as chaotic as humanly possible. The characters are lovable, and there's this incredible hook that takes you to the edge. Battling a monster that eats you, unless you get intoxicated, is a really wild concept, so shout out to John Wright for handling something that I'm not sure just any director could have done. Grabbers is one of, if not the best work from his filmography. And with that, our list of 10 underwater monster films that nobody dares to recommend comes to an end. Well, that's it. I hope you guys had a great time learning about all these underwater creature movies, and I'd be even gladder if you took to the comments section below to let us know which one of these you've watched and which ones made it onto your watch list. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, the best way to see more videos like it is to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, if there's any movies you'd like us to cover in more detail, feel free to request that in the comment section down below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.